It is a pleasure for me to introduce the Chief Medical Officer of Bexa, Dr. Monique Gary, Dr. Mo, as she is affectionately known as a breast surgeon with expertise in minimally invasive breast cancer surgery and reconstruction. She is actively involved in many cancer advocacy organizations. Her research focuses include genetic risk assessment, health disparities, and cancer nutrition and prevention. And so I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Monique Gary to the stage.
Well, good morning. It is such an honor to be here today. To the men in the room, this chat is for the ladies. I was well informed that we're to talk today to each other, for each other, and among each other. And it is such an honor. You know, Texas is one of my favorite places. And the last time I was here, I was celebrating a birthday with one of my mentors, Dr. Antonio Novello, who was the first Hispanic U.S. Surgeon General appointed by President Bush Sr. And she said, we have to do something different for women. In the same way I'm doing something different for young people in Puerto Rico and bringing vaccines to rural communities where children can't get vaccines. Why can't we do that for women? And I said, Dr. Tony, we will. I said, we can and we will. And so I want to certainly thank our former First Lady, Mrs. Bush. It's truly an honor to be here, to be in your presence, to be partnered, not just working with and chatting with, but partnered actively with your institute and with your amazing team. Connie, thank you for inviting me. To our distinguished guests from Texas Tech, from Hendrick Health, from Bexa, I'm just honored to be here in your presence. So the best invitation I ever got, and like I said, I love Texas, and I used to be on faculty at TCU. It was when Connie said, just be yourself. She said, tell us what we need to know. Tell us how you treat patients and why you joined Bexa and what makes Bexa special to you. And for that, Connie, I say thank you. So if that's the case, we're going to get really real, and let's start with a day in the life of Dr. Gary. So this is me, I'm in surgery, but before I get here, my day usually starts a little something like this. And this is one of my patients, and it's shared with permission, and she finished her chemo, and she's getting ready for her surgery. Her whole family's there, and they've all got on their t-shirts, but her shirt says, Satan said to me, you can't handle the storm. And she said, I said back, today, I am the storm. And she wore her shirt into surgery, and she was the storm, and she did amazing, and we laughed together, we cried, we prayed together, and we discussed this existential question you're gonna hear over and over again, well, why me? And I see the full spectrum of women who get their mammos every year like clockwork, the ones who couldn't, the ones who wouldn't, and somehow cancer still happens. And I see men who are ashamed to sit in those waiting areas in the pink gowns, and they work in landscaping, and they work in the military, and all these places and spaces where cancer happens, breast cancer happens to them too. And they wonder, well, why me? And then I see the young women. My youngest patient last year was 17 years old. A young lady I mentor who will be at Oak Cliff on Saturday was diagnosed at 19 and recurred at 22, and she wants to be a doctor. And we're holding the door open for her to become a physician. She's an overcomer. And I answer all those tough questions about, you know, what is chemo? Why is it necessary? And what does personalized medicine mean anyway? And so I might leave the OR, and then I'll head maybe to the lobby of the hospital and do a PSA. Early detection saves lives. And then I might head to my farm and volunteer. And this is Mona. She's 77. She's a master gardener who judges the Pennsylvania Flower Show every year. And she told me I could tell her story. And the last time we met in the clinic, she says, Doc, I'm almost 80. And I'm so lucky my cancer was caught early, but what about my granddaughters? What will they be facing? And for the last 10 years, since I left Georgetown, I've come up short when women ask me the question, is this the best that we can do to find cancer? And so I told Mona, I launched into my spiel. I said, well, you know, Mona, we've come a long way, but I really wanted to understand how far we'd come, so I did a little research. In order to understand what Bexa is and what makes it better, we'll start at the beginning. This is from the beginning. It's pretty obvious that innovation wasn't developed for the female lens, through the female lens, or with us in mind. And in fact, it seems the opposite might be true. So the first X-ray invented 1895. And if you look, by 1977, the first MRI, poor Larry Minkoff was a graduate student, and his boss strapped him to a machine and said, get in there. And they looked at his heart and they looked at his lungs. And then if we look at the first lung screening program, 1930, during the TB pandemic, step up to the box, hold your breath. Doesn't look that much different from the MRI and the mammogram. Step up to the box, hold your breath. And so it seems the more things change, they kind of stay the same. And that translates in the data. And I'm not going to show you a lot of data slides today. Oh, but what about mobile imaging, right? That was a great thought. Marie Curie, World War I, she said, well, let's bring the X-ray to the men in the war. In 2024, we're still bringing the X-ray to the people. Doesn't look all that different, unfortunately. And so the data reflects that the use of mammography within the last 2 years for women who are age 40 and over, and we look from 2008, because back in 2003, Laura Bush participated with Susan G. Komen, and those numbers spiked that year, but we're starting 2008, and we went up to 2019, and you can see the numbers really haven't changed much. I'm told that there's a special on Good Morning America that we're missing right now that's going over. Where are we with mammography? And how many women are getting their mammograms every year? And they're going to do an expose or some kind of special. So we all got to go home and watch GMA. But the subtext of that headline is it probably hasn't changed that much. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on the news. And why? Because our guidelines are telling women, well, maybe we start at 50 and maybe we go every other year. And then now they've reversed it. The Preventive Task Force said, well, no, let's go at 40. But let's do it every other year until you're maybe 55, and then maybe you talk to your doctor, and you know, maybe if you're 70, maybe you could stop altogether, and people are confused. They don't know which way. And so it translates into these minor fluctuations, but no real movement. And what you should know, and what most people in this room do know, is that not all cancers are created equal. And what do I mean by that? So there's stage 0 through stage 4. We know people who've been diagnosed with stage 0 breast cancer. It typically is found on a mammogram. It's not usually a lump. It's usually little tiny salt and pepper flakes. The mortality, how many people live with stage 0 breast cancer? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years. 97 to 99% of women with stage 0 are still alive. But the most common presentation of cancer is not the dots, it's a mass. And if we don't find that mass early, how many of those women are still alive at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? So stage 0 is a different disease. I'm the principal investigator of a trial that's looking at not operating for this because, well, people aren't dying from it, and we're over-treating it, and we're radiating people, and we're giving them pills that block their estrogen and make their hair brittle and make their joints ache, and we really need to do all of this for stage 0. But for the masses, for the lumps that young women are feeling, nearly 80% of young women who are diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 40, they find it themselves. And you're going to hear some stories today. And there's currently no screening recommended method. There's no guideline for these women because the technology isn't appropriate for them because it's density-based. It's like looking at a cloudy sky, looking for clouds. Hard to find. And today, there are 300,000 breast cancer survivors living in the U.S. who are diagnosed under the age of 40. And so we know that women don't experience it similarly. For women of color, for Hispanic women, they don't experience it similarly. They get cancers that are more aggressive. They're more likely to need chemotherapy. It impacts their fertility, their sexual and psychosocial well-being for the rest of their lives. You know, Tiara will tell you some statistics that are going to shock you. And when we look at, this is just published in 2024, I did an interview with Wall Street Journal. What's going on with young people and cancers? And young people, what you need to know from this slide is just the uptick at the end. More young women are being diagnosed with breast cancer. And we don't have guidelines, and we, until Bexa, don't have a lot of solutions for them. And so it's important for us to know that we've got to step up to the plate because tomorrow's cancer doesn't look like my grandmother's cancer, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but tomorrow's cancer looks a lot different, and if we're using today's tools, we're not going to be prepared for the fight. And it's why innovation is so important in this space. I was recently at the World Economic Forum, and I'm so grateful to our CEO, Dr. Peterson, for bringing me there, because there were 4 key things that they were very focused on, and one was certainly disinformation and misinformation. A lot of myths and misinformation out there. They're worried about global events. But the big headline was this: the impact of women's health on the global economy. And the tagline was, if we don't do something by 2070, the rates of cancer will double, and younger women will be impacted, and it's going to affect the entire global economy, because they're going to receive a diagnosis that now costs more because they don't get screened, and they find their cancers late. And so 62% of women in the US, great health insurance, may not get a mammogram. 78% of women who are low income, who come from neighborhoods like I do in inner city Philadelphia, may not get a mammogram. But around the world, more than 90%, 93% of women around the world will never get a mammogram. They're not going to get a Prenuva. They're not going to get the full body MRI. They're not getting the PET scan. We can't carry that equipment to those places. In rural West Texas, they're not going to get that mammogram. And so it's up to us to offer them something different. So we know that early detection saves lives, and this is essentially to depict that. When we find it early, 98% of people are still alive. 92% at stage 2. At stage 3, well, the numbers dwindle, and at stage 4, we're more than our numbers. I know survivors of stage 4 breast cancer who've lived 25 and 27 years, and they're important stories to tell, but overall, we've got to do better to find cancer early. Early detection saves lives, and we know it, but why aren't women getting screened? And we went, our CEO, I give him so much credit, because he said, well, let's just ask women. And he did. And you know the number one answers? When he listened, when men listen and women talk, and not just nod, but when they actually listen, they get really good information from women, right? So number one reason, pain. It hurts. I don't want to do that again. The tech wasn't friendly to me. They pulled my breast. It hurt. I tore my skin. I've got sensitive skin. Fear. I'm afraid of radiation. I'm afraid of what this means for my family. I'm afraid of the whole process. It just scares me. Delayed results. I've got a physician friend in my group. I told this story last night. She's a primary care physician. She said she had to wait 2 weeks for her mammogram report, and they said, well, you've got dense breasts, and now you need to get an MRI, and she's got to wait 10 weeks. She says, is that normal? Should I tell my kids something? How do I plan my clinic? Should I take time on all these questions? She says, and I work in healthcare. I'm a primary care doctor. What should I do? For the women in our communities, they wonder, is it going to cost more money? Every time I get that mammogram, I get a call back. And now I got to get an ultrasound, because you know how it is. You get that report, and we've all seen it. It says, the sensitivity of mammography for heterogeneously dense or greater breasts is diminished. And you're like, well, did it work? And you take it to your doctor, and they're like, well, you know, you have dense breasts. And you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And what it means is that you, yes, you, and you might benefit from supplemental imaging. Well, that supplemental imaging isn't covered. And if you got to choose between your kid's daycare and getting an ultrasound for your breasts because you got dense breasts, something gives. If you got to take a day off from work and get dye in your arm and sit in a tube for 45 minutes to get that MRI, you're a lot less likely to get it. And so the fear of more testing, more and more testing, is what keeps women from doing it. And then the inconvenient and intimidating settings. I hear this from men, I hear this from women. I sit in that dark room and I wait for them to call me, and then I go and I get that study, and then I just leave and nobody tells me anything. And then I wait. So there's gotta be a better way. And we ask women, well, what matters to you? And they said, well, we want it to be fast. We want it to be convenient. We want it to be pain-free. We're tired of radiation. In Iceland, those women go every other year, not because of access, but because they don't want the radiation in their bodies. They're a clean society. They're a green society. We are concerned about, can it be done if we're pregnant, if I'm lactating, right? Is it safe for pregnancy? Right? Is it good for dense breasts? Can it work for me so that I can maybe not have to get another and another and another film? So these are the things that matter over and over, every single marketplace. And so if we don't get a mammogram, well, then what happens? Well, I'd like to think that, these 10 fingers are magical. I really would. And that's called the clinical breast exam. And as magical as I think these 10 fingers are to find and get rid of cancer, the sensitivity of this to find cancer is about 50 So if you don't get a mammogram and you get a clinical breast exam, we're taking our chances. And around the world, for women who don't even have access to a mammogram, this is all they get. And you know, like I know, you go to your doctor and you gotta ask for a breast exam because they stopped recommending them because they're just not that good. But you don't know what you feel. You were told you have dense breasts. You feel a lump. Is it fibrocystic? Is that the word? Fibrous? Is it, what's that stuff? They told me I have fibrocystic breasts. What does that mean? And so there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of fear. And so for women who won't get their mammograms, this is what they get. And over 20 years, we're discovering that, you know what? It's just not a good comparison. We have a crisis on our hands. And if we're going to address that crisis, we have to choose between a world of fear and, well, a world of progress. We choose progress. We choose innovation. So how does it work? It's a much-needed solution, right? No pain, no fear, no radiation, no delayed results. It's not inconvenient. We go to where women work, where they pray, in their places of emotional and psychological safety. We go to their school districts. We are partnering with the state of Florida, and we're in the school districts. We go to the airport. We go to the hangar. We go to where the women baggage handlers are. And we're able to do the exams. And so, let's talk a little bit about the technology. I was raised by a Southern grandmother who said, nice young ladies know how to cook, clean, and play the piano. And if there's any piano players in the room, you remember those 88 keys, right? It's pressure, you press down. Well, Bexa is high resolution pressure elastography. Elastography is like photography. It's a way of taking a picture of the breast. And instead of those keys pressing down individually, you've got a vertical and a horizontal array. And they're alternating like a lattice. So at the bottom of that sensor, and we have some little squeezies, I think we'll probably hand out a couple of them at the end, but at the bottom of that tiny sensor unit, there are 192 sensors that can detect down to the nano unit changes in the elasticity or the stiffness of the breast. So, what does that mean? Well, think about it like an olive. You've got the fleshy part, and you've got the pit. Right? The pit's the stiff part. It's the hard thing. So something can sense through the soft, through the fleshy part, that there's a difference in the tissue. How does that work? Well, it feeds back on the sensors over 100,000 times per second. These high capacitance sensors are able to figure out this is normal tissue, this is normal tissue, this is normal tissue, there's a mass. And that's what it does best. It finds the mass. And it distinguishes it from the normal tissue around it. So for those of us who are scientists in the room, cancers are about 100 to 1,000 times stiffer than the surrounding tissue. Again, think olive, think pit. Stiffer than the surrounding tissue. And so what if there were a way to be able to say, you know what, you're lactating, okay, I see those changes. Okay, you've got an implant, I see those changes, but boom, something there is different. And so Bexa becomes a solution. And what I mean by that is it's not just we run the probe and then we see you later. But if something is found, we do something immediately. There's a next step that's done and you get an ultrasound. And so we get to know before you leave that place, before you walk out of that room, if something is suspicious, if something needs to be followed, or if it's just your normal breast tissue. It's not density dependent. So for all of us who've been told you have dense breasts, guess what? You have a solution that works for your breasts. Now, the science of it is this. If you take a look at the picture, I don't have a pointer over here, but on the right side of your screen, that green at the bottom, it says there's something there that's stiffer than the surrounding tissue. The capacitance, the sensors have sensed it, and it shows up as a peak on the monitor. It does not use heat, it does not emit energy, it's just a bit of pressure and then feedback on the sensor. So our carbon footprint is very low. It is different than things like thermography. It is FDA approved, class 2 device. It has a CPT code. Someone asked me about that earlier. And so, well, what happens in comparison to mammograms? Because that's the question, right? We all want to know. How does it level up to the gold standard? And in every study that we have done so far in the US and abroad, it does really very well. It's non-inferior, and in some studies is actually better than mammography because mammograms will miss up to 20% of masses. It's really good at finding those calcifications, but the masses that women are going to need chemo for, things greater than 5 millimeters, and it's this, the sensitivity greater than 90% in some studies, including the tail of the breast, the corners where the machine doesn't get, the sides over here where the mammograms aren't able to get, and you're going to hear some stories about that. Unaffected by density, safe during pregnancy and lactation. So it becomes a system and a solution. I've spent the last several years publishing on risk scoring and helping women to understand their risk, because I'm high risk. I've got a family history I'll tell you about in a few minutes. But how do we better help people decide who needs this imaging? And so now Bexa has become a solution. In the next several months, by the time we roll out in West Texas, we're going to be able to tell you, based on your family history, based on your other risk factors, maybe you should get screened twice a year. We can personalize it to you. And then we offer that imaging, we offer that ultrasound, and every woman who has something found gets a call from a clinician, a doctor or a nurse that says, hey, listen, we saw something. Who's your doctor? Let's get you hooked up at Hendrick. If we're in the Bahamas, let's get you hooked up with our primary care, our gynecologist there. If we're over in Idaho, let's get you hooked up with the nearest breast center, because we want you to follow this up. And so the connection is made. So when we do Bexa, and when we compare it to mammogram, and this is a study that we've done, the little pie charts on the bottom, I'm not going to saturate you with too much data, but 245 women in Saudi in a mall, right in the middle, they're busy shopping, and 250 women say, yeah, sign me up, I'll do it, in a society where women don't really talk about their breasts. So we thought that was pretty striking, but 250 women, and 80% of the time, mammo found it, Bexa found it. And then there was some of the time that mammo saw something and Bexa didn't. About 10%. And then the things that Bexa saw that mammo didn't. Bexa finds things that mammo doesn't see. And about 20% of the time, we find something that mammos didn't find. So 20% sounds like a decent number, right? Okay. But think about it, for all the women who weren't going to get that mammo, who would have never had that finding to begin with. And if we play the numbers out a little bit more, 82% of those are going to end up needing follow-up care. They might need secondary imaging by their primary, or they might need a biopsy. And so Bexa finds important things, not the fluff. So you're not going to get sent back for imaging for things that don't matter. And that is really important for all of us who get called back every year, and we got to wait, and we get that letter only to be told, it was nothing. Just dense breasts. We'll see you next year. They know immediately. So it is a better breast exam. And what makes it better is not just the numbers and the statistics and the data and the study that we'll publish from Texas Tech and the next study that we'll publish from Texas Tech and the third study that we'll publish from our clinical team at Texas Tech. But 93% of women finish with a negative exam, so they're not getting false positives. The 7% of people who have a mass get an immediate ultrasound, and the 3% of those that have something suspicious get referred directly to their doctors. And the net promoter score is kind of this number that tells how well people really like things. So like Tesla has a 92% net promoter score. Apple has a 90% net promoter score. Bexa has a 98% net promoter score. Meaning women would do it again, they would tell a friend, and invariably that's what they do. They call and they say, hey, can I get my cousin in? Are you guys gonna be here tomorrow? And we say, no, we're probably packing up. But you know what? The answer pretty soon is, yeah, we'll be there tomorrow. And yes, you can tell your neighbor, and you can tell your nanny, and you can tell your colleagues that we'll be here for you. And all women get that personal call from somebody on our team. This little device gets around, and if this sensor could talk, it would tell you stories of women who traveled 100 miles in Mexico to get an exam. It took a little jaunt over to the Bahamas, where the women are so afraid of breast cancer because they have a 1 in 4 chance of having a hereditary mutation, a BRCA mutation. And they see entire families dying of breast cancer where there's maybe 3 or 4 machines for 11 family islands. The device has been across the seas to pop music festivals. It's been to casinos. It gets around. I told you, it's been to malls. Right, we've been at the One Music Festival, and guess what? It's putting on his cowboy boots and his hat, and it's headed to West Texas. So the data speaks. The women are speaking, and we're demanding more from our preventive healthcare experience. And getting back to the original question, what if healthcare was designed, preventive care was designed with us in mind and at the forefront? It might look a little bit like this. It might look like you got an examiner who's going to walk you through your breast exam and tell you, oh, you feel that? Well, let's go over that area and let's talk about, no, that's normal tissue. There's no mass under there. So that when you leave, the number one comment women say is, when I left, I felt better informed. I felt like I understood my breast for the first time. It might look like a setup in a mall, or it might look like our she shed. Our chief operating officer said, why don't we put it in a she shed? And we can take it, we could put it in a parking lot. And how many women would wonder, what's over in that shed? Yeah, that's a she shed for me, a she me shed? And they'd wander in and they'd get their exams. So bye-bye, mobile unit. Hello, Bexa she shed, right? And this is innovation. I love it. It might look like marketing like this. The only squeeze you're gonna get is our little squeezy stress toy. That's the only squeeze you get. It might look like we handle with care. We're not gonna flatten you, right? This is what the marketing can look like when we involve women, and every woman wants that, handled with care. It might look like our partners in Colombia at the Today Show there. She's teaching her client about her breast exam. We're marking the places in Colombia. We just signed another couple of counties and communities, and it's taken off like wildfire at pharmacies and places. It might look like marketing material that speaks to the women and speaks the language of the people. Reviews that say, I found it amazing that such a small device could be used for early detection. And the best part was it was pain and pressure free. The treatment was kind and at all times with great success and great respect. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Because healthcare really could all be different. One of my favorite sayings is, what if this was all different? This could all be different. And it looks like doctors who are partnered with their patients. And Connie said, talk about the farm. I've got a 40-acre farm in Pennsylvania for integrative wellness for cancer patients. And at that farm, we teach those principles of mind, body, and spirit. And Bexa aligns when we say, this is something for you that's gonna give you peace of mind. It's for your body, and it'll lift your spirits. And I can't think of a better alignment than that. That's the company I'm in, and that's the work I get to do. And it's such a joy and a privilege to do it. You know, I can't stand in this room with these people and not talk about legacy. On the left is my mother. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 29 years old, and she died before she was ever even able to get a mammogram. She died before 30, leaving behind 2 girls, and my grandmother in the middle took in those 2 girls, and she was told she had breast cancer, and it was the kind that didn't show up on her mammogram. And she got it, and the doctor said, well, ma'am, you got 6 months to live. And she said, well, no, I have a granddaughter who said she's gonna cure breast cancer, and so I'm sorry, I have better things to do than die from cancer. And she didn't, and she got diagnosed another 8 years later, and they said, well, you got about 6 months, make your plans. And she said, no, I heard that before. And she died 25 years later of heart failure, the ripe age of 87. But she had a cancer that mammograms didn't detect. And it's a privilege to stand here and say that I'm going to do the research to find the cancer that they couldn't find in my grandmother's mammogram. That's gonna be my legacy. I have one beautiful niece who is the love of my life. And when I think about the world that I'm leaving to her, it's gonna look a lot different than the world that we inherited. And that is the legacy and the opportunity. And when we look back and reflect on this moment, it's gonna be that we innovated and that we stopped waiting. We finally stopped waiting and decided that together we could do something so innovative, like that ARPA-H grant says, so revolutionary, so groundbreaking that it changes the rules for women's health care. And I can't think of a better solution and a better answer to the question than that. And that will be our enduring legacy, and I invite you to be a part of it so it can be your legacy. Each time a woman stands up for herself, and Connie, you said this last night at dinner, every time she does it, without even knowing it and without claiming it, she stands up for all women. And I look at these hands and I look at this arm, and it kind of looks like the Bexa sensor. All these little hands and all these little arms joined together to find a mass and get women into early detection. That's our mission, that's our life's work, that's our goal, and it's our privilege. And I thank you for the opportunity to tell you about it.